Hello everybody, welcome to What Culture Gaming. I'm Scott and we need to talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake's ending. Now, we're going to get into full spoilers, full mega flare, oh my god, end of the world, meteor spoilers. So you have been warned. Obviously this is an ending discussion, breakdown and theory. But you have been warned. Up front, I love this stuff. I love the direction they're going. I know it's ridiculous. It's full on Tetsuya Nomura coming in, Mr. Kingdom Hearts, and going, what can we do to shake up the formula for Final Fantasy VII to extend and expand on what people thought might happen, that it might just be a direct one-to-one remake. It's not. It couldn't be further from the truth, and the very end, the final 40 minutes, are pretty much cleaving the fandom in two. So at the very end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you come up against the fact that the Whispers that were following you for the entire time are pretty much a manifestation of destiny. They were trying the whole time through the game, all the different chapters, all the times that they intervened, they were trying to maintain the timeline as it was in the original game. And so, you know, that boils down to getting in the way of certain characters interacting before they're supposed to, bringing Barrett back to life because he's not supposed to die in that moment. They even save Aerith when she falls off a ledge. At the very beginning when you first meet her, she falls off, one of the Whispers catches her, puts her back because she's not supposed to die there. And so I like the idea, even on that idea of it, I like the idea that the original game's expectations, canon, and timeline are manifested inside the remake, and our characters realize this and realize what they're up against. And so at the very end, when the Whispers are millionfold and they're covering big chunks of Midgar, and it's almost like they're screaming, this is how things are supposed to go. We have Sephiroth and Aerith, who very much seem to be aware of what's going on. Now, this is the stuff that gets really crazy. This is the bit where it's just... There's enough stuff in the game that backs up these theories. I call them theories, but I think this is entirely what they're going with, and I'll explain as I go. So there are three main strands to this final thing. We've got the setup of the Whispers, we've got Aerith, and we've got Sephiroth. So I'm going to go with Sephiroth first. His agency in the game is you barely see him until the very end, and then he turns up for the big final fight. But it's all of his dialogue that is incredibly important, because he says to Cloud when after they finally have the big old fight, and him and Cloud end up on the edge of creation, and Sephiroth says to Cloud that he has 7 seconds until the end, and he wonders what he'll do with it. Now this is fascinating because in the original game, when Sephiroth appears to kill Aerith, when he drops out of the sky, literally down to the second, the amount of time that Sephiroth is on screen in that scene is 7 seconds. 7 seconds from him appearing in the sky, dropping down, stabbing Aerith, that's a 7-second window. I don't know if they always planned that, Final Fantasy VII, back in the original days, but whatever. That feels very much like what he's referring to, which would, assume that going forward in part 2 or part 3 or wherever we get to the point where Aerith gets stabbed, you're now going to have some sort of agency in that. Because a lot of Final Fantasy VII Remake is a celebration of the original game. It's very much lots of callbacks and nostalgia, and we've gone back, we've made this weird little enemy that no one cared about into a great big final boss. Things like that. There's a lot of calls and nods and winks. And, just an acknowledgement that these creatives have been on this ride with us for the last couple of decades. And one of the biggest fan requests, one of the biggest assumptions across the last couple of decades was that Aerith was never supposed to die. She was initially in the PS1 game, she was found, there's a piece of artwork of her looking up at the Highwind in the original game's instruction manual that isn't in the game. She's dead before you actually get the Highwind. And the assumption is that, she wasn't meant to die. There's also a space left for her in the final fight. There's a bit where all the characters line up before they fight the final version of Sephiroth, and there's a plinth that's empty. And a lot of people also think that that means that's where Aerith is supposed to go. And so, over the years, it's always been this thing. Was Aerith supposed to die? Was that cut for time or whatever? Everybody just fell in love with Aerith and wanted her to survive. And I think they're bringing that back. I think that's part of this remake. I think that all of this is geared towards the idea that maybe you can save Aerith. I don't think that'll come, easy. I think you'll still have to kill somebody, and God forbid I have to kill Tifa. But still, the 7-second window that he refers to, gives the game away, quote unquote, in that this Sephiroth, remake Sephiroth, is the same one as before, and his consciousness has traveled between both games. Now this explodes everything in regards to, and I've got more evidence, don't worry, but this explodes everything in regards to the way that Tetsuya Nomura is bringing his Kingdom Hearts brain to Final Fantasy VII. And if you think of Sephiroth and Aerith, they are two massively overblown entities. You know, you have Aerith representing all things joyful and light and positive, and Sephiroth all things dark. Both of those entities in different Final Fantasy VII ephemera, whether it be Advent Children, Crisis Core, whatever, you know, they've done it all. They, you know, at the very end of the original game, Aerith pretty much has become the life stream. You see her face as the very last thing that you see after the life stream protects the planet from the meteor. And Sephiroth too, in Advent Children, it's not canon anymore, but in Advent Children is brought back because some of his followers, some of his clone type people, bring him back based on the fact that even though Sephiroth's body is dead, there are still bits and pieces that can be recovered in terms of memories. As long as someone is thinking of Sephiroth or remembering him, somehow that results in him coming back. So he has came back before. And there is this 7-second thing. There's also the fact that Sephiroth refers to the future of this game, of the remake's future, as something that hasn't happened yet. And when he's about to be defeated in battle against Cloud, he says, "Not yet," and he pushes Cloud back away again. There's all this stuff in regards to, they know, Sephiroth and Aerith both know how things are supposed to go. And to pivot that across into Aerith, at the end of the Midgar section, she says that what awaits her on the other side of this interdimensional portal is boundless, terrifying freedom. Now, I love this as a comment from the developers to the fans in terms of, look, we've nailed part one, or we think we have. They obviously wrote this, you know, before it's out there. And whatever comes next, it's boundless, it's terrifying. We don't know, but go on this journey with us. I like that as a meta-narrative commentary. But also, Aerith says that whatever happens on the other side of this thing, she says that we won't be ourselves. Nothing will be the same again, because whatever happens to those characters, it's going to be different to what was the original timeline. And it just means that there's more that can be experimented with. I mean, you can also factor in here that we see Zack is still alive. It seems like he's in his own timeline because you see a different version of Stamp, the little cartoon dog that Shinra has co-adopted for some of their propaganda adverts in the main game. He's a different species, he's a different breed, sorry, of dog in the timeline with Zack, but we see that Zack has survived his onslaught against Shinra, and Zack is very much alive at the very end of that game, looking out over Midgar, which itself is swarmed in whispers. But it seems like with the gang defeating Destiny at the very end, that has freed everything up. And going forward, they don't know what the hell's going to happen next, whether Aerith's going to be able to survive. I mean, they show scenes, Cloud remembering or predicting, precognitively looking forward to the scene where Aerith dies and the holy materia falls out of her hair and goes into the water. That scene is in here, even though Cloud hasn't experienced that yet. I think all of that is to wrap around the fact that Sephiroth and Aerith both know what has happened in the original game, and their consciences have both gone through all that stuff and are now replaying the events in the remake. It's Final Fantasy VII Remake is almost a sequel, an alternate timeline where the original game is over here somewhere and we're now following this main timeline. Most things are the same until they really start to diverge. It's also worth pointing out on the Aerith side that there are multiple examples throughout the game of her knowing exactly what's going to happen. One of them is at the very beginning when you first come across her, she gives Cloud a flower and she says, "Oh, these are the sorts of flowers given when lovers reunite." Doesn't mean anything to Cloud, but it, you know, and it's almost like a fan nod on our side. But still, there are so many more examples in Chapter 12. When Tifa goes to tell Aerith that she needs her to go take care of Marlene, Aerith jumps in and finishes the sentence for her and says, "Oh, you want me to get Marlene, right?" She wouldn't know who that is. She has no reason to expect that. So that makes sense too as to why she is playing all this stuff out until she eventually gets to the very end on that bridge leading out of Midgar, and her tone totally changes and she gets quite scared and she pulls Cloud back because she doesn't know what's next, because this is them deviating from the timeline. Another example is that, well, across the game she talks about the future not being set in stone, about straying from the path. She tells Cloud not to fall in love with her in Chapter 14 if you get her optional scene. And she also thanks Cloud for all of the memories that she's had with him, even though, you know, in the timeline of the game we've only really hung out with Aerith for a couple of days. And maybe Cloud means that much to her in that small time span, but it makes more sense for Aerith to be referring to the original game, referring to everything that those people have already been on. And it's only, like I said, it's only Aerith and Sephiroth that are fully aware of everything that's happened before and how they're going to change it going forward. Because it's worth pointing out here that both Aerith and Sephiroth both die. And, you know, whether Aerith was forever happy becoming part of the live stream and protecting the planet in this ethereal sort of capacity where she can, you know, fend off meteors left, right, and center, hanging out with Zack in the afterlife. On Sephiroth's side, clearly he's not okay being dead. He always says, I don't only want to be a memory, which is obviously the line from Advent Children, but a lot of the key creative staff oversaw that too. That idea of Sephiroth wanting life, wanting to matter, wanting to be this, you know, all-conquering soldier, that's kind of his drive and always has been. And it's the thing that's, you know, he's had such a strong willpower, it's prevented him dying, which is anime 101. So I think that it makes sense, quote unquote, to, in a world that knows how this story is supposed to play out, to start manifesting destiny and character will, and having characters be aware of their destiny, be aware of where they went in a past life, in an old game, and then look to try and directly affect that. I personally love that stuff because it directly draws in the experiences that we've had and we've talked about for the last 20 years, and then tries to make that the story. It's very meta, but I do like it. It's all going to be in how they handle it going forward. It could be a complete mess. I think it's promising. The final thing that brings all of this stuff together and confirms that idea of multiple timelines is in the final fight when you go up against the, it's called the Accretion of Whispers, which is the giant Whisper Harbinger, the giant big one. When you go up against that, and it's 3 small minions, they're called Whisper, Croceo, Rubrum, and Viridi. If you use the Assess Materia, that usually gives you, you know, weaknesses and stuff like that for each enemy. Use that on the Whispers and you'll get pieces of lore for each one. So for Whisper Harbinger, if you focus on them, it states that the big final boss is an accretion of whispers, accretion being a build-up of all these whispers, all this build-up of fate and destiny and how things are supposed to go. And the quote is that this accretion of whispers is the so-called arbiter of fate. The creature appears when someone tries to alter destiny's course. They are connected to all threads of time and space that shape the planet's fate. Carry that across to Whisper, Croceo, Rubrum, and Viridi, the smaller ones, and the quotes for them, and they are an entity from a future timeline that has manifested in the present day. It also notes that all of these creatures protect the future that gave shape to it. So, I mean, all of this stuff directly lays out the fact that we're dealing with multiple timelines. We're dealing with the idea of the Final Fantasy VII crew, you know, being spearheaded by Aerith. It's very much her that says, this is what awaits us if we decide to mess with time in a meta sense on the developer end. We're going to mess with this established formula, this established story, and characters engaging in a game. We're going to charge forward and we're going to see what we can do if we literally break the canon, if we literally break the expectations. I love it. I love how meta it is. I love the fact that they've found a way to codify in-game the idea of resetting expectations overall, because now we don't know if Aerith dies. It's not a foregone conclusion like it was assumed in a pop culture sensibility that, oh, this has to happen and this has to happen. No, it doesn't. Maybe Tifa dies instead, maybe Barrett dies instead, maybe nobody dies and everybody can be saved based on multiple endings or how it goes. I don't know, but the way that they're going forward with it, you know, it's considering how much, like I said, Final Fantasy VII Remake is this big celebration of the original game. One of the biggest fan requests was always whether Aerith lives, and this could be their way of doing it. One of the final lines to draw attention to is when you finally beat Sephiroth, Aerith is the one who says, we can change this, we can make it right. Which in a weird way makes it feel like the original Final Fantasy VII was like a bad ending, and this is the one that's going to be the way forward. But it seems like neither Aerith or Sephiroth are happy with the way that their fates eventually ended up. And obviously, Sephiroth does have to die eventually, but maybe Aerith can survive. Either way, though, my main thing hangs on the fact that their consciousnesses carry forward. And we're dealing with an Aerith and a Sephiroth that have greater knowledge of past events with everyone else trying to catch up. I think that stuff is absolutely fascinating. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you like the idea that the remake is kind of secretly a sequel, and what do you think is going to happen in the next installment? Do you think they should keep running with stuff like Zack being alive and potentially Aerith being saved? And do you think they've already gone too far with it? What did you think of the Kingdom Hearts influence? Is it already too much not like Final Fantasy VII, the one that you remember? Or are you game for whatever happens next? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.